this year. Over the last month and a half or so, it's been very tough economic sledding for a lot of people. And Don has been one of those great leaders that continuously moves us forward in a positive manner. Don DeVivo, chairman of the Middlesex County Chamber of Commerce, to introduce John Larson.
Good afternoon, everybody. Happy that you all can make it and that you're all healthy. We're really honored to have Congressman Larson here with us. He really needs no introduction, but he is the U.S. representative for the Connecticut's 1st District, and he's been a representative since 1999. I know every time I see him, I have to resist the urge to call him Senator Larson, dating back to his days in state Senate. I guess it's kind of law of primacy. I always think of him as Senator Larson, but Congressman Larson, we're very pleased that you're here with us. We know that your position on the Ways and Means Committee is going to be huge for the economic recovery and hopefully for the state of Connecticut. And just like to thank you for everything you're doing. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Don, and thank you, Johanna and Larry. It's great to be with you this afternoon, and I look forward to hearing from you. Suffice it to say, these are extraordinary times, especially for the small business community. I want to commend Governor Lamont and his administration for their leadership during this crisis. We're working very closely with the governor's office. Further, our hospitals, community health centers, and frontline health workers have been the true heroes, as are our first responders. The private sector as well, too, has stepped up in extraordinary ways, whether it's been donating PPE, meals to hospital workers, or manufacturing of vital supplies. And also, you can't help but mention everyone from our grocery clerks to truck drivers who keep us fed and keep this economy moving. But this is exceptionally difficult time for many small businesses. We've conducted several teletown halls during this time and have been working directly with our SBA regional director here as well, and a number of businesses. And despite being told that help is on the way, the relief for the small business provided under the CARES Act clearly was not enough, and the initial funding for the PPP ran out on April 16th. Further, too many businesses have faced barriers accessing these funds or were shut out of the process altogether. This has had devastating impacts on our small businesses and their employees, who are the backbone of the American economy. The whole delegation and I are doing everything we can to help survive this pandemic. Last night, we voted for the Paycheck Protection Program in the House of Representatives and further enhancement of the Health Care Act, H.R. 266. This bill infused PPP with, and that's the Paycheck Protection Program, with an additional $310 billion so that more businesses can access the program. Out of this new funding, $60 billion was dedicated to community-based lenders such as community development financial institutions, minority depository institutions, micro lenders, as well as small and mid-sized credit unions that have a long track record of assisting underserved businesses such as minority-owned, woman-owned, and veteran-owned businesses as well. It also provided an additional $60 billion for the Economic Injury Disaster Loans, or EIDL as they're commonly referred to, and emergency injury grants. And these have been especially tough for people to get, and we'll have more to say about that. I'm interested in anecdotally what's happening with your experience in the Middlesex Chamber. We will continue to monitor these programs to ensure that relief is going to businesses that need it most, as Congress intended. If they fail to continue to meet the needs of this community, we will hold responsible, and that's why oversight and review is going to be so important in this process, those that have failed our local businesses. And while this package was much needed, it's only a small step forward. Our small businesses will need more help as they continue to combat this pandemic. And it's important that we underscore that. This is an international pandemic, global in its nature, national in its impact, and it strikes every community. But first and foremost, this is a health crisis. And the sooner we address it as such, the sooner we can get our economy back up and running. We must continue to take care of our frontline health workers, including essential business, and those employees in harm's way. And of course, our local and state governments, who are also on the front lines of the crisis. All of these are critical to a strong economic recovery. I will continue to work to make sure that Congress urgently addresses the nation's health and economic security, as well as providing additional relief for families and small businesses. You may have heard that last week I was asked by the White House to serve on the Congressional Task Force to deal with the coronavirus and reopen government. And while I may have many disagreements with the President on several issues, it is at this time during crisis that it's most important to put aside all partisanship and ideological concerns and do what's in the best interest of the country. And I'm honored to serve, and I believe that will give Connecticut a seat at the national table. During last week's call with the President, I elevated the concerns that I heard from Governor Lamont and community leaders and small businesses. I've spoken with most of the universities, the hospital professionals, and business leaders in the 1st Congressional District. And anecdotally and specifically, that allows me to put a oar in the water, so to speak, on behalf of Connecticut. I also emphasize that we must work to address problems affecting the elderly in our communities, and of course, people of color who statistics have pointed out are both more in line and likely to be subject and susceptible to the coronavirus, and especially the elderly, but especially the elderly of color, and more specifically, women of color. The health of our citizens and the health of our economy, and I think this can't be emphasized enough, that the health of our citizens and the health of the economy are inextricably linked. We need more funding for testing, for tracking and treatment, and trace contacting, or as tracking is often referred to, and ultimately the vaccine that will ease everybody's concerns. But that's about a year away. But the testing can begin now, and in fact, in this last bill, we dedicated more money for that. And with that, that will bring the assurity that the consumer and citizens need to, and the benchmarks we ought to be holding people to in order to reopen this economy. And with consumer confidence and consumer spending accounting for 70% of the country's GDP, you can easily see how these are inextricably linked. And defeating this pandemic so our country can recover is the fundamental moral imperative of our time. I have also called upon in a bipartisan basis, and again have been working with the White House and my colleagues across the aisle to establish a bond act, and by that, a patriotic way in which we can involve all American citizens, but by the purchase of victory bonds, in this case, victory over the virus, and proceed to sell those bonds with the ability of the government to use the proceeds to directly infuse the resources that we need from a medical standpoint and a small business standpoint, which we need to make sure that we're addressing. And we're heartened. I know that you have a number of questions that you have to ask, and we'll get to those right away. But I anticipate we referred to this package passed just yesterday as 3.5 because it actually just built on the original CARES Act, giving another $320 billion out to small businesses, making sure that of that, a number of that was directed specifically, another $75 billion out to hospitals, $25 additional billion out in terms of making sure that there's appropriate testing that's going on as well, and also making sure that we're targeting relief in the best way that we can. In the first tranche of SBA-approved loans, I think more than 1.3 million loans nationwide with an average loan size of about 240,000. In Connecticut, there were over 12,000 loans, resulting in appropriation of close to $3 billion. We are aware that many businesses were denied in the first round of funding for various reasons, and we wrote to Secretary Mnuchin and Administrator Carranza to urge them to keep accepting PPP applications and approving new lenders in anticipation of more funding. I can't say when exactly SBA and lenders will begin issuing new loans, but Congress just approved last evening these, which I believe, as we're speaking, the President is at a signing ceremony to make sure that these go into effect and they get out the door. So with that, Larry, why don't I open it up for questions that you might have, and including, and I'm most interested in future ideas that you have. As I indicated last night, we passed $320 billion for the Paycheck Protection Program, $50 billion for the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, $75 billion for hospitals, an additional $25 billion for testing. But we felt strongly that there should have been money in there for state and local municipalities, and was just pointed out today, and others have been commenting about the fact that one of the problems coming out of the last recession is that state and local municipalities didn't get enough money from the federal government to sustain the recovery. And in doing that, it slowed down the recovery, it exacerbated it, and made it all the more difficult. We don't want to make that same mistake again. I know what Mitch McConnell has said, but I'm heartened by the fact that the President and Secretary Mnuchin both agree that state and municipal funding has got to be a priority, as well as utilizing more aggressively the Defense Production Act to manufacture test kits and to do a whole host of other areas that will be important to rebounding our economy during this time. So with that, and having said that, why don't we open it up to questions that people might have. I would just also add that I was on a conversation with Susan Bransfield and members from the community of Portland, and we talked about the importance and the need to help local first responders and also help districts. But I also want to emphasize again that please, as it relates to stimulus checks individually and otherwise, go to irs.gov/coronavirus. And there is a Get My Payment portal that you can check the status and update of any information that's needed. I can't commend Governor Lamont enough. I think their 211 line, and we've heard this from numerous constituents has been just extraordinary in directing them to the right spots, and also letting people know that with respect to testing, regardless of insurance, or if you think, well, I have too high of a copay or I don't have insurance, this is free. We want to make sure that people are getting tested. And if you don't have a doctor, you call 211 and they will direct you to where you need to go to get those tests. And with that, Larry, why don't I turn it over to you, and we'll take any questions that people have.
Congressman Larson, I'm going to take it from here. Good afternoon, Jeff Pugliese with the Chamber team, and good afternoon,
Hey,
everyone. I'll be good to hear your voice, sir. I'll be managing the question and answer portion through the chat portal here on our Zoom meeting today, and Johanna Bond and Daniela Letta, my colleagues at the Chamber, are still on, and they're managing what's coming in through our InfoAd account and through other means. So why don't we kick it right off? You mentioned it briefly, Congressman, but we have some questions about time frame here, and with respect to the lag time between when the president signs the bill and it becomes law, and when the portal specifically for EIDL and for PPP may reopen. I know you touched on it briefly, but do you care to expand on your thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, sure. No, we expect that it's going to go out immediately. We expect, as we're speaking, that the president has signed the bill, or was due to sign the bill at 1 o'clock today, and we expect that they will go out immediately. And again, because there has been a couple of snags with this, we are meeting. In fact, I'm meeting with restaurateurs and Mark Hyatt, also Hayden, who is the director for SBA for Connecticut and Rhode Island for this region, so that it may be necessary in the future to make sure that we have further meetings of this nature, to make sure that as people are making themselves available, have put in for their PPP or their EDIL loans. EDIL especially has been troubling because they have been far less than responsive. The whole delegation continues to write them, and we're at a loss to understand why they aren't getting more applications processed and out the door. It's why I always like to say it's important to have oversight and review with all of these issues. And the state of Connecticut, there's been seen a massive increase in unemployment insurance filings, and we're working with them as well to try to help this along as best we can during this process as well.
Thank you, Congressman. Appreciate that. This next one is a little more technical in nature, but we're going to send it your way. There's a lot of confusion and questions coming into our office about the forgiveness process with respect to PPP and how that will work and the mechanics of that as we go into the out weeks here. So we understand that the PPP funds come into a bank account and they have 8 weeks. The 8-week clock begins right away. But the questions are around the back end of that 8 weeks. In order to satisfy the forgiveness requirements, do they have to keep on employees beyond the 8 weeks? And are any other thoughts with respect to that question on the forgiveness side?
Yeah, we're going to have to look at, because this comes up every time I'm talking to anyone, Jeff, and already, and even in the case of restaurants, and in the case of in speaking to caterers and other people, they're looking at me and saying, we bring on our people, we bring them back, we keep employment, but we still don't have any work, and the 8 weeks run out, and what happens then? And so we're continuing to emphasize it's rare. In fact, I would venture to say it's probably the first time that you've seen Congress come together and in less than a week's time pass more than a $2 trillion package of relief. Well, the good news is that Congress came together and passed much needed relief. The bad news is when you do something in a short span of time like that, it's bound to create problems. So we have been continuing to write and emphasize to SBA on two fronts. One, the need for oversight and review and constantly staying on this. And I'm not talking just from an accountability standpoint, but also from a flexibility standpoint in terms of how this will best work and how we can best assist our small businesses and our states and municipal governments through this economic recovery. So we continue to anticipate that there will be problems, but we hope that we wrote both Secretary Mnuchin and Administrator Carranza to urge them to keep accepting PPP applications and approving new lenders because we anticipate the funding that's just come down. I believe that we'll probably need more funding as well for sole proprietors or independent contractors, wages, commissions, income of net earnings, self-employment that is capped at $100,000 on an annual basis for each employee. The amount of forgiveness of a PPP loan depends on a borrower's payroll costs over an 8-week period. That 8-week period begins on the date the lender makes the first disbursement of the PPP loan to the borrower. The lender must make the first disbursement of the loan no later than 10 calendar days from the date of approval. We hope and want to make sure that the loans currently within the queue or the E-Trans system will be honored when the funds start flowing again, and that's our anticipation.
Great, thank you for that. We have another question here which is similar and may require additional guidance from SBA or even Treasury down the road, but I will still pose it to you. It's with respect to sole proprietors and really small or even micro businesses and how they handle the member draw. If they don't have a lot of employees and the 75% is not necessarily going towards multiple employees, but is taken up partially at least by some of the member draw and paying themselves up to the $100,000, will that impact their ability to achieve forgiveness as well? Because they are concerned about carrying the loan liability if they aren't successful in checking the necessary boxes on the forgiveness side.
Yeah, it's a great question. As I said, we're going to have to continue to work on making sure that SBA remains flexible with respect to this, and that I think it's going to be vitally important that we keep actual records. The goal here is to make sure that we're not short-sighted and that we don't find ourselves in the situation where we come out of this as we did in the last recession prematurely. The Center for American Progress has indicated that the lessons learned from the last recession is that the feds didn't pump enough into the economy, especially into the state and local government, and that's why the recovery was slow, and that's why it lasted after the recession. And in the last recession, state and local governments started cutting just as the recovery was taking hold, blunting any positive impact that a stimulus was having. And so it's our hope, and we will continue to make this case both on a regional basis and on a national basis on this task force I'm serving, that we've got to remain flexible, especially as we go through this early stages, and especially again because of the how interdependent, or as I like to say, how inextricably linked both the health and recovery and how we deal with this virus is tied to consumer confidence and also how we're able to benchmark and get people back to work by making sure that we've got the confidence of the people because of the testing and the contact tracing and the treatments that we develop, and ultimately, of course, the vaccine for this virus that will provide everybody with the confidence and a path forward that gives everyone the comfort level that we need.
Great, thank you for that response. We have 2 more questions in the chat here, and then a few more that have come in through other avenues. First of all, we can get this one out of the way. It's from our chairman, Don DeVivo, who introduced you a little earlier. I have a letter from your colleagues, Congressman Richard Neal and Congressman Peter DeFazio, to Secretary Mnuchin regarding support for the motor coach industry nationwide. I don't want to take everyone's time on this call, so what is the best email address to forward this letter to you? Is it fair to say that we should send him to Connor, Congressman?
Absolutely.
Okay, we will do. And Connor's been very responsive to our office, which we appreciate and want to make sure you're aware of that.
Absolutely. And Rich Neal and Peter DeFazio, we're blessed. I was saying to Larry last week, we had a conversation earlier this week with the New England Council. And to think that in this region, Rich Neal out of Springfield and Rosa DeLauro out of New Haven, the most important election this fall will not only be the re-election of Rosa DeLauro, but she will be elected to become the chair of the Appropriations Committee. And this is going to become incredibly important, but to have the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Rich Neal in Springfield, and the chair of the Appropriations Committee in New Haven, Connecticut, is only going to bode well for the region and provide us an opportunity regionally to exert our influence, but also take care of the many pressing needs that we have in this region, both to get the economy going again and what we anticipate also will be in a future package, a major, again, where Rich Neal and Peter DeFazio have been working together to get everybody on a major infrastructure package that to sustain a recovery. And I think this has to be mentioned as well, Jeff. The one thing you want to make sure you're doing, and it was advice that Francis Perkins gave Franklin Delano Roosevelt, that as you go through any crisis, as we learned from the most recent recession that we had as well, where the Center of American Progress is, points out that we didn't do enough and we got out too early and we curved back, which ended up being detrimental. What Francis Perkins said to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, we not only want to solve the crisis, we want to make sure that the structural changes that we make are ones that will sustain the economy in the future. And in the case of this coronavirus, whether it reemerges in the fall or whether other types of viruses or pandemics emerge, that we're prepared for it and now have a structurally sound way of making sure we're addressing these issues, including a number of the structural things that have to be done with regard to Social Security, with our infrastructure, with our healthcare delivery system, and the way that we report and account. And that's why, again, oversight and review are going to be critical during this process and should be ongoing.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to move to the info account quickly. I will read this directly. Congressman, my question is, why would the SBA assistance loans be so aggressive with the shortness of payback terms? These are not realistic terms for many small organizations who, while profitable, will not in many cases be able to carry already stressed monthly overhead, but the added burden of assistance loan payments will be unmanageable. It truly seems that the next wave of economic turmoil will be the defaulting of loans that will lead to the Treasury Department ending up as a collection agency for many years and the collapse of hardworking entrepreneurs. Why not extend term loans so that all can have a shot of recovering from this crisis?
Well, as I said in my opening remarks, first of all, he's spot on with the question. And as I've said throughout, SBA is going to have to be more flexible. But in getting a body like Congress to move quickly on $2 trillion, and then to understand that we needed to respond, especially on the PPP side, even quicker because that money was used up, and all the problems that the questionnaire just underscored have to be addressed. And it's difficult to address them when Congress is not in session because what we have is a number of back and forths. But as part of being on this task force, this presidential task force, that was one of the initial questions that was raised by several members on the task force. It's also why meetings like this are important. If members, and I'm sure they are hearing this in every one of the 435 congressional districts, of the need to be more flexibility, and it's great to pass something initially so that you're able to build consensus and get it out the door. But if you don't follow up and do the research, if you don't follow up with the oversight and review, and by that I mean finding out the problems that are going to be inherent. And this is not a one-size-fits-all economy or economic solution. And again, that begs for flexibility, and it also begs for all of us working together on this. But that's the great question, and that's what we hope to achieve and continue to do so. And again, I would say that it's all linked to getting the health side of this under control ASAP. And everything that you've heard about more testing is real. And I don't think that there's anyone on either side, and including the president, who can be defensive on this issue, but I think understands that this is critical to restore consumer confidence. And in as much as that makes up 70% of our GDP, is absolutely essential to any recovery.
Agreed. Thank you very much, sir. Okay, another one from the info account. The assault on states like Connecticut through tax policy is concerning, be it the SALT tax or lack of state and local assistance in this financial challenge due to this pandemic. Is Congress going to address these challenges moving forward? Any thoughts on that front, Congressman?
Well, both on the Ways and Means Committee, again, Rich Neal has put forward a bill, all of us from especially all the impacted states, just not Connecticut and Massachusetts and New York, California, Texas. We were hopeful because Congressman Brady, the ranking Republican on the Ways and Means Committee, is an impacted SALT state. But again, that was a bill that was ushered to the floor in haste, and they pay for, in that instance, falls unsquarely and arguably is double taxation, and something that was understood as far back as Abraham Lincoln. This will continue to be fought both in the courts, and we have introduced legislation in the House. McConnell has been reticent to take it up, but we're going to continue to press this, and also press this during this coronavirus.
Okay, great. Appreciate that. Nice shout out to President Lincoln there. So back to the chat room here. This is an interesting one. Will federal funding become available to assist with retrofitting occupancies to accommodate more spacing among occupants and reconfiguring HVAC systems? Any talk on that front in DC?
Well, and the short answer is it's going to have to. But I do think, in being back in Connecticut and talking to a number of impacted businesses, et cetera, and very common sense, logical ways of saying, hey, listen, we know that these pandemics and the potential for newer ones to be introduced in the future are going to require different norms and different types of behavior, and that the practice of social distancing, but also I think hygiene in general, and whether it's the frequent washing of hands or wearing of gloves, whatever the issue requires, one thing is for sure, and that's that we're going to have to change the way that we think. Unfortunately, in the past, what's happened is a crisis emerges, great concern is drawn to it, the crisis dissipates, it goes away, as will this crisis, and we return to normal, again, not making the long-term structural changes that we need for the future, and in the process, also being flexible with regard to how we're doing that. But Americans are great innovators, and I think we'll be able to do this. The problem is, yes, there's a lot of conversation going on in Washington about this, but there hasn't been with people back in their states. There is teleconferencing going on, et cetera, but not the what I would call regular order to get this stuff on the books and in legislation where it's required. But that will be ongoing work, and it's a great question.
Great, thank you. This next one is more in the form of advice or a recommendation on the flexibility and forgiveness side. We have some members weighing in that they believe forgiveness rules need to be evaluated to include costs of the crisis, medical equipment, new technology, i.e. software, customer care for a doctor to Zoom for a business, and maybe move out the 8-week period to when employees are back at work. And she uses the example of stimulus for a restaurant who would be closed now and perhaps for the next number of weeks, as opposed to bringing them back now when we should all still be socially distancing. So I know you're working on that front, but just some thoughts from some of our members.
Well, yes, and we are working on those fronts, but you know what's even more helpful is to take those, and I know you'll transmit them to me in writing, because it's better when you have them in writing, and then I can submit them, and both on the task force and to the respective committees in the House as well, and then the respective agencies also. And I'm going to be blunt here. We need to kick some butt with some of these agencies, et cetera. And I'm not talking from a political standpoint, but I'm talking about this from a bureaucratic standpoint. And sometimes people in a position over a long period of time develop, I won't say bad habits, but steady habits that may not be the most productive in a time, in a situation where we need to be productive and need to be flexible in terms of dealing with a pandemic of this nature, which has caused the crisis that we're in.
Great, appreciate that. We will certainly share all of these thoughts and sentiments with your office, and we appreciate that opportunity. This next one is also from the chat. Do you know if there is any legislation in the works that would provide liability protection to small businesses when it comes to COVID-19?
I know that there has been discussion. I don't know of any specific legislation.
Okay, great. I'm going to send it back to Johanna to see if she has anything else from the info account. I believe I've exhausted all of the, oh, no, I spoke too soon. Hang in there with me. Another one just came into the chat, so I will share it now. Are systems in place to extend unemployment that was exhausted in December of 2019, so the benefit year hasn't expired? If yes, what specifically needs to be done to take advantage of this for a new self-employed business that began on January 3rd, 2020, and was thriving until being suspended by the governor's executive orders in March, specifically March 20th? Although thriving, not in business long enough for PPP or EIDL consideration. She is wondering is that correct? And if it is, do you have any thoughts or advice for her? New business.
Well, here's my thought and advice. If she gets me that information, we'll follow up and try to get the answers for her. I could not answer intelligently on the multiple levels of the issue that she lays out. All very common sense, I would add, but sometimes common sense eludes the bureaucratic system that we're operating in. But those are all good questions and important. And take it, and we'll get back to you with the answers.
Great. We will make sure we connect you. One more from the chat, and this is more of, I would say, a macro-based question. What is Congress's assessment of the long-term economic impact of the robust borrowing on the U.S. economy to fund the coronavirus assistance programs?
Well, I don't think that there's much of a choice here, and I think, though, when you take that into consideration with our continued war effort in Afghanistan and in the Middle East, when you take a look at a $2 trillion tax cut that was unpaid for, when the economy has remained flat and there hasn't been a infrastructure program in over 8 years, that Congress has got to be concerned long term about making sure that we're working to deal with the obvious deficits that are being created here. But when you're facing a pandemic of this nature, it is like an act of war, and in this case, a war against an invisible enemy, but nonetheless a formidable enemy, and you have to put forward the resources. Again, I would say this is why oversight and review, and the question hasn't come up, but also people that would otherwise, and people will during a crisis of this nature, try to take advantage of a system, et cetera, and we will, Congress has got to make sure, as do the agencies, that there is a price to pay for that, that I believe is a criminal act, especially when you know how important and how much this is needed in time of a crisis and in time of, let's call it a wartime economy, because that's what it is.
Okay, thank you. So at present time, there are no more questions in the chat. Johanna, do you have anything coming into the info account?
I actually had one come privately. Congressman, I understand your concerns and hard work. The issue we face from a small business perspective is that PPP has no loss of, hold on, an email just popped up, no loss of revenue. Calculations so the money went to the best business clients of the banks, many of which are still in business, and no loss of revenue. Additionally, it went to Fed and state funded agencies that may not need it. I am not sure why it was written that way, as many don't understand that, but now it had to be repealed in the second round to be fair. Thoughts on if that might be investigated through the forgiveness process?
Absolutely. And your first part of the question, why was it written that way? I think because the depth of the problem and the speed, and now speed is a relative term, but for Congress, I mean, Mitch McConnell hasn't taken up 490 bills that the House has sent over to him. And there's a tendency to think about Congress as one homogeneous entity. I assure you it's not. And then this other painful thing, when the latest, one of the studies that came out, and it's led the Supreme Court Justice of the United States to call for a whole new look at civics and understanding of how our democracy and system works. 70% of all Americans don't know that there's 3 branches of government. So my point is that a democracy is an imperfect system, but the best system that we have, the bill that was generated in a week's time, a week's period, has obvious flaws and things that need to be perfected. And why I think this kind of input, and Johanna, is vitally important, and why further that members need to hear not only from their chambers, but we do several what we call teletown halls, et cetera. And, just heard from Chief Shea up in Portland, and Matt Melmed also about a number of the health concerns and also the first responder concerns that people have. And then when we get into the various layers of your question and, was there a tremendous amount of thought in terms of how this would go out the door? And there was back and forth, strong philosophical differences between the House of Representatives and the United States Senate. And with Secretary Mnuchin, for the most part, trying to act as referee, and also the impact on higher education. And as you may have seen, how some of the best endowed universities in the country got money, and that they're sending. Some of them are sending back. I think there will be further legislation, and legislation that is going to look very unfavorably on people that have taken advantage in the system. But we need, again, the kind of input that you're providing here to make sure that we're writing bills and correcting them in the future. And I'm sure this one that we put out the other day is going to need, more corrections yet. You may have heard me saying that and talk about, small credit unions and other small proprietors and minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses and other issues that hadn't been fully digested and taken into consideration in the midst of the crisis. So that's why these conversations are important, why your input will matter, and why we hope to get it in to make the kind of future changes that will make this run in a manner that's the most efficient and will best serve our constituents.
Okay,
Great.
so go ahead,
I have
JB.
one more question, Jeff.
Sure, go
Thank you
ahead.
very much, Congressman, for that. I know that was a long question. We appreciate your response. This is another question. Are the loans currently within the queue in the E-Tran system? If they are, will they be honored in order of how they came in when funds start flowing again?
Yes, and everybody's been pretty insistent on this, and even in talking with local banks too in Connecticut, that's one of the first questions that comes up. Is, well, my application was submitted. It was one of the early ones. They said there was a mistake in the application. We corrected it. I didn't get the loan, but they said I'm in the queue. What does that mean? And what it means is that you are in the queue when you submitted the application. And that's the same process we're saying that the SBA and that everybody ought to be utilizing. The other thing I would recommend, and I've found Mark Hayden, from the SBA, the regional director, even though he's over in Rhode Island, because I think you're probably all aware of what's going on with respect to Providence and everything that's going on. But Mark Hayward, who is the interim director of the Connecticut district office and is in Rhode Island, I would think that a session like this with him would be incredibly productive. And I'd be happy, along with the other members, to who have had Mark at different programs, to arrange for him to come before the Middlesex Chamber in a manner like this, something he could do from Rhode Island as we wait to go from an interim director to getting a permanent director for the Connecticut District Office.
Okay, great. Thank you, Congressman. Jeff here again. I think we've exhausted everything in the chat. Oh, I have spoke too soon again. Here we go. Back to the chat question. I am surprised they are in the SBA system in the queue, as the banks are saying they have to input those that did not get approved once the system opens. Very different, as they can order as they wish at that point. So I guess it's another question about the E-Trans system and where that process stands. But I don't know if you want to have any additional thoughts on that front.
Suffice it to say that there are issues and problems that exist. I get it. You're on the other end of the phone. You got someone that, is a member of the legislative body that passes a law that then goes to an agency that interprets the law. And then the way that that law is rolled out, I can only tell you what we're hearing. And then your feedback becomes important for us to further refine this and say, hey, wait a minute, but that's not how it's actually working in practice. Here would be a better way to achieve that. And so that's why your input is important and why my response is insufficient.
Understood. So that exhausts the chat, and we appreciate that, Congressman. I'm going to kick it back over to Chamber President Larry McHugh for some closing remarks. Coach.
Thank you very much, John, for outstanding job as usual. I really will be taking you up on to getting the acting director in for a chat also. Again, I just want to emphasize the thanks to all of us for Connor. He has really worked well with Johanna setting this up. As usual, your staff has always been done a terrific job in the grassroots level for working together. So thanks for offering that up, and we'd love to get him on board with us for future chat. And again, thank you very, very much for your commitment to not only the state of Connecticut, but indeed our great nation. Everyone have a great day, and thanks a million.
Thank you, Larry.
Bye, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Be well, everyone. Thank you.
Jeff and Johanna, circle around afterwards.
We'll stay on there.
Okay.